Hey there, everybody. It's John Fleischman with So Does It Matter? And we're here for another great podcast, but we're trying something new and interesting, something I've never tried to do before, something that is so intimidating that I'm not sure I'll get through it. I actually have four guests on this podcast at the exact same time. And that's because we are interviewing today the Golden Ticket. And the Golden Ticket is headed up by Steve Hilton, who is running for governor. Gloria Romero, who is running for lieutenant governor, Michael Gates, who is running for attorney general, and our friend Herb, Herb Morgan, who is running for controller. And so over the next hour or so, we're going to have a conversation with all of these people. And I think Herb had the best advice for me ahead of time. He's like, make sure you type control. We're all type A personalities. We're just going to go for it. But the only thing I'll say before we get going is if you're enjoying this, if you want to help me out, but more importantly, if you want to help out the candidates that you're hearing from today, the best way to do it is to share this with all the people that you know so that they get a chance to not only experience each of these candidates, but they can experience them all together as the golden ticket. So with that having been said, I feel like it's a professional boxing match where you're supposed to tell the rules so that not only the people on the show understand them, but the people listening at home or watching at home understand them well. The ground rules are very quick. We're looking for short answers. I'll repeat that for the attorney, short answers. And I may jump in to move us along, be like, hey, hold on a minute. This is someone else's question. We'll just see how it goes. So, first of all, I'm going to do introductions because I will do them succinctly, and then we're going to jump right into questions. So, Steve Hilton, wave hello, Steve.
How you doing?
Steve is a Bay Area businessman, and by the way, all of these introductions, this is what I do. I got onto Chat GBT and said, "Give me an introduction for each of these people." So I haven't read it. So we're going to hear these at the same time. So if AI does not like you guys, we're going to find out in real time. Steve Hilton is a Bay Area businessman and policy figure who previously served as a senior advisor to United Kingdom Prime Minister David Cameron, and later moved here and he's become a U.S. citizen. He is running for governor on a message of lowering costs, restoring economic opportunity, and pushing major reforms to a state government he says is failing. By the way, I can assure you it is failing. It doesn't say it here, but Steve, of course, for quite a period of time was a host on Fox News with his own program. Gloria Romero is a former California State Senate Majority Leader and education reform advocate who left the Democratic Party after clashes over accountability. I'm sure she would tell you she didn't leave the party left her. They went nutso. She says her experience inside legislative leadership prepared her to challenge California's political establishment. Michael Gates is an Orange County attorney. He's the former elected city attorney of Huntington Beach, California, Surf City, USA. He also sacrificed his own time and his family's moving back to Washington, D.C. for the first year of President Trump's second administration. And we'll see if I get this title right, to serve as the Deputy Assistant United States Attorney General in the Division of Civil Rights. I know I got that right. I practiced it. And his focus as Attorney General is on public safety, local control, and enforcing the law consistently. And then finally, we have Herb Morgan. Herb is a businessman and financial executive with a background in investment management and corporate governance, which, based on the people currently occupying this job, makes you very overqualified. He is running for controller on a platform of fiscal oversight, transparency, and acting as an independent watchdog over state spending. So if you guys have things you want to add, you'll have to weave them in as you will. So we're going to start out with a quick answer from each one of you, and we'll kind of go in this. I'll call each of you one at a time. Steve, what is the biggest problem in California that you could fix as governor?
Bloated nanny state bureaucratic government, because that's what generates the fact that everything is so expensive, everything is so difficult. The tax burden, the regulatory burden, it all stems from the fact that we've got this bloated government bureaucracy. And the good news is, as governor, you run the executive branch and you can take a sledgehammer to that thing. And that is my plan.
Perfect. You can all think ahead. You're all going to get to answer this question. Gloria?
Well,
What is the biggest problem in California that the office of lieutenant governor can actually address?
well, most people have no idea even what is the lieutenant governor, who is the lieutenant governor, and what does the lieutenant governor do other than wait to see if the governor's alive that morning.
All right,
As
well,
lieutenant governor, I know Steve is in great health, so I don't have to worry about that. But the lieutenant governor is somebody who, if you know how to use a bully pulpit, and I do, and I know where the bodies are buried in Sacramento, can have a tremendous voice in looking at waste, fraud, abuse, particularly where we spend most of our money in California, almost 50% in education. Higher
Right.
education specifically, but I intend to increase that link to gain greater accountability in the K through 12 system with meritocracy and looking at actually measuring where we put our money and making sure that we have success in the ranks.
And
Additionally,
we're gonna ask you more questions, Gloria, about education. So this is kind of an opening round. It's not your final round. So you'll have plenty of chance to talk about the office and what you're
well,
gonna do
you
with it.
asked me
Herb,
the most important. That's the most important.
right? Herb, what's the biggest problem you see in California that you can fix if you're the controller of California?
Well, in my opinion, there's nothing more important than the financial mismanagement of a $325 billion budget. The state controller is the only constitutional officer who is uniquely endowed with powers to audit every entity, every agency that touches state money, all the way down to counties, to cities, and to NGOs that receive grants. This position has been sitting doing nothing for the last 4 years, while I estimate between 25 and 30% of that budget is completely wasted or stolen. So stopping the steal of state resources is the easiest low-lying fruit for the state controller.
That's a great answer. And Michael, last but not least, what's the biggest problem in California that your office as Attorney General would be able to address?
We can actually tackle a lot of issues on day one. High crime rates is obviously one of the top priorities for everyday Californians, and that includes enforcing Prop 36, which our governor and Attorney General Rob Bonta think is optional. They don't want to do it. But as part of that, we're going to tackle the fraud that Herb was talking about, the $250 billion of unaccounted for money through waste, fraud, and abuse. Not only are we going to prosecute criminals responsible for that, but we are going to claw back the money. We're going to find that tax money and get it returned to the taxpayer, but also reduce homelessness and protect our girls in sports, or protect our girls from boys in girls' sports. And so we're going to be Title IX compliant on day one as well.
All right. By the way, I'm getting very excited already. If this group of people are sworn into office a year from now, holy cow, are we going to see a great, tremendous turnaround for the state of California. So we're going to go into a few segments where I'm not everyone's going to get asked to answer every question, but all of you, by the time we're done, will have opportunities to answer the same number of questions. So on this segment, we're talking about cost of living and whether state government is even capable of fixing some of these things. But we're going to start with you, Steve. California is staring at deficits, insurance instability, and homelessness pressure. If you take office tomorrow, what are the first 3 executive actions that you would take? I get to be this specific because, frankly, your platform is this specific. But what are the first 3 executive actions that you would take on day one if you came into the office of governor?
I'll start with something that people may think is kind of small and insignificant, but it drives people crazy, and it's an example of how they just take more and more from us and we get less and less. That is vehicle registration. Vehicle registration fees in the rest of the country, you're talking mostly under $100. Here in California, $600, $700, many people paying over $1,000, some people over $2,000 to renew their registration every year. This is something we can stop on day one. I laid out a plan to do this a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to fix it at the flat registration rate of $71 per vehicle per year. That is something we're going to do on day one. And the reason I think that's so important is it just shows you with the right attitude, you can make meaningful, tangible differences in people's lives. But number 2 is going to be much broader. And that is to put in place, to nominate the people who are going to take the positions of leadership in all these executive agencies, the agencies of the executive branch, over 200 of them. And this is where so much of the cost and the bloat is coming from. CARB, the Air Resources Board, pushing the extreme climate agenda. That's why we have the highest gas prices in the country and the highest electric bills apart from in Hawaii. The Coastal Commission, that's just become a complete nightmare for anyone living in those areas. The farmers in the Central Valley and elsewhere being deprived of the water they need to grow our food because of the State Water Resources Control Board. Now, in each of these cases, and literally hundreds more, by the time I take office, which will have already, less than a year from now, I will have the people ready. Even in the course of the campaign, you will see as we build this team, the nominations that I will make, serious, qualified leaders for each of these agencies, and they will be put there on day one. It definitely connects, by the way, to something Gloria, I'm sure, will talk about, which is how we get these people ultimately confirmed. But you can make the changes on day one. That's incredibly important. And then the third thing is just to go in there with the proposal, the legislative proposal, to send to the legislature to say, look, the people of California just voted for change with a very specific campaign plan. $3 gas, cut your electric bills in half, your first $100,000 tax-free. No more free healthcare for illegal immigrants so we can lower healthcare costs for you, and end to the insane regulations that make it so expensive to build anything so we can restore the California dream of a home you can afford to buy. All of that will be expressed in my first budget and in a legislative package that I will expect the legislature to work with me on to deliver and to enact the will of the people who would have just elected a Republican governor for the first time in 20 years. And so I'll expect them to work with me on that. So a small but specific thing, a broader thing for the executive branch, and legislation to make it permanent.
When you get elected, Steve, they're still going to be in shock trying to figure out exactly, because it will have ultimately been a referendum on them.
Exactly.
And they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do about it, or they're going to find themselves pretty vulnerable in their next elections. Herb, why don't you talk in your campaign about radical transparency? So name one area where billions are being wasted right now and explain how the controller can expose that fraud and that waste, even if the members of the legislature don't really want you to.
What a great question. I could give you 12 areas, but you asked for one. So I'm going to start with the
Well, you can
easiest.
if you're concise, you can maybe do 2 or 3, but I want to give you a chance to.
So the easiest one obviously is in homeless outreach and homeless spending. And let me preface the answer by saying we Republicans are compassionate. We actually want to deliver world-class services to the citizens of California, and that includes homeless outreach, homeless programs, all of those things. But what my research tells me, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that the money is being siphoned off along the way through a series of, let's call it what it is. It's a giant money laundering operation. So the way to solve the problem,
The homeless industrial complex, as we like to call
the
it.
homeless industrial, but the entirety of the state would make Tony Soprano proud, right? This is how we are running the state of California right now. The business model of running the state of California and all of its subsidiaries is that people get wealthy along the way. Well, where I come from, you get wealthy in the private sector, and then you give of yourself to serve your state or your country or your community. So we have this plan. I have this plan. It's called Radical Transparency. We have very low cost, very ubiquitous technology that exists today that would allow the state controller's office to read the financial transactions of every one of the subsidiaries of the state. And as a condition for releasing funds appropriated by the legislature, I, the controller, have the power to mandate reporting. My reporting mandate will not be give me a semi-annual report or an audited financial statement in 2 years. My method of reporting will be you will hook up via an API, an electronic link, your checking account to my office. So every transaction will be read every day, and then those transactions will be written to a blockchain ledger and be made available online to anybody who's interested. An armchair economist, a university research team at Caltech, a mom or dad in a school district. That is called radical transparency. That immediately will dissuade much of the theft that we have going on.
That's amazing. I guess that is radical transparency, isn't it? So that's a good stuff. Gloria, since Steve went ahead and mentioned kind of collaborating to bring a legislative proposal to the legislature, why don't you talk about that for a minute? And I mean, as the lieutenant governor, you talked about all these things that a lieutenant governor does that people don't know. Maybe you can explain to them that you actually have a role in the California State Senate.
And if I made the appointments as well, that's very important. Gloria and I talk about that a lot.
And
the appointments to the executive branch.
You know, the lieutenant governor position right now is considered like the Seinfeld of state government. You know, what does it do? If you know what to do, then you can do it. Steve makes the appointments. The lieutenant governor is actually the president of the Senate. And it's in the Senate, beginning with the Rules Committee, where all appointments are vetted, heard, voted upon, and pushed out for vote by the larger body. Well, I was the majority leader of the California State Senate. I served on the Rules Committee. I know how those processes work. And on day one, I would want to meet with both houses of the Senate because I've always believed you've got to work across the aisle. That was my pattern and practice when I served in the Senate. So working with them right away to talk through the process. I don't want it to descend into lawfare or extreme reaction. I think I will be a very strong bridge working with a bipartisan chamber to ensure fair vetting and to move those forward, moving key blocks. So I think that's a key role right away that the lieutenant governor can play on day one. And it's rarely done. It's usually ceremonial when the lieutenant governor even shows up in the Senate.
Right. And I also think that bully pulpit you talked about is going to be important. I could just only imagine a scenario where we're trying to nominate people. Steve, you're nominating people for positions that are mirroring the campaign you ran on. And these folks are going to want to, I don't know, never confirm any. It's going to be it'll be a process. Hey, we're going to talk a little bit we're going to move into Michael's territory here a little bit. We're going to talk about, although frankly, everyone needs to be worried about crime and drugs and public safety. Michael, the attorney general can't prosecute everything. Although if any attorney general could, you could, but you certainly can't prosecute everything simultaneously. So what would be your first, like if you had to name your first three, like you get in the office and you're like, hey, I've got a list of 1,000 things that need to happen. But in terms of litigation or getting right on top of stuff, what would be the first three that you would say are your, like, day one, we're getting in there. These are the first three.
Right. So it could be characterized this way. Basically, the quality of life crimes, keeping our streets safe, excuse me. As you may know, in Huntington Beach, I actually started a city-level criminal prosecutor program in 2017. And we attacked and focused on the quality of life crimes. And we actually won an award in Huntington Beach from a pro-business organization that realized that lower rates of crime in Huntington Beach meant a better environment for our businesses to do business in. So it's the quality of life crimes. The Attorney General has purview over all 58 district attorneys throughout the state of California. So that's purview over all 58 counties. And those 58 district attorneys' offices answer to the Attorney General. And so I can have a mandate, an expectation that all counties enforce the same priorities in the same way. And so we can have uniformity throughout the state of California. And every prosecutor in the state of California really should have a zero crimes agenda in their jurisdictions. Every prosecutor should be prosecuting crime so diligently and effectively and aim towards getting zero crime that we really will be reducing crime on day one. Prop 36 is a huge asset to that. So as you know, back in over 10 years ago, Prop 47 and Prop 57 passed, and it reclassified a host of felonies to misdemeanors. There were lesser penalties and frankly ended up resulting in zero prosecution of a lot of thefts, smash and grabs, drug-related crimes. Prop 36 restores that. And on day one, we are going to enforce Prop 36 as well, along with all the district attorneys throughout the state of California. And in order to accomplish this goal, my plan is to also have in all 482 cities throughout the state of California, city-level prosecutors, just like we had in Huntington Beach, city-level prosecutors that are on the ground and they are entrenched in their communities, attacking the quality of life crimes. And then those city-level prosecutors will work with their district attorneys to lower crime. As I said, in Huntington Beach, we saw amazing results. We reduced crime by double digits, over 11% in year one, and then precipitously thereafter. Every city in the state of California should have a city-level criminal prosecutor to prosecute crime along with their district attorneys. And so with this comprehensive approach, attacking the quality of life crimes specifically, using Prop 36, installing city-level prosecutors in every city throughout the state of California, we can reduce crime throughout California by double digits as well. And heretofore, Attorney General Rob Bonta has just been a soft on crime or absent on crime. And so the district attorneys are also soft on crime or absent on crime in some counties. And so we're going to straighten all that out. I can guarantee you, John, that within a couple months of me being in office, the state of California will notice a difference. We will have safe streets again. Our communities will be safe. Our businesses will want to stay, and our families will be safe. I guarantee it.
I think that's great. I think all of you would probably agree, and Gloria more than anybody on this interview has seen it in firsthand. But part of the biggest problem that we have is that the people running policy in California, including our attorney general, they really don't even believe in the concept of individual responsibility tied to individual liberty, that we all have agency, we all have decisions to make, and if we choose to make bad decisions, we should bear the consequences of those decisions. I remember a whole TV special on smash and grabs in San Francisco, and all the politicians could talk about is a food desert in San Francisco, and about how if we would feed these people, they wouldn't have to break into people's cars. And I've always remembered that as just being completely nuts. Steve, as we're still talking about this crime and section, and Gloria, just to get you prepared, our next section's on education, so to get you kind of ready. But so if cities, you know, it's kind of an interesting scenario now, because now we're talking about a turnabout where now we'll have some conservative leadership coming out of Sacramento. So how would you as governor kind of deal with cities that now, a lot of our big cities in California, we all say we support local control, but a lot of our big cities are controlled by absolute left-wing, board, city councils. How would you use your office to try to make sure that we could get some of these common sense ideas implemented at the local level?
Well, I've always a couple of things in general. I just want to say one specific thing about crime, though, which is for years, as you and I have discussed, others watching may not have heard me talk about this before. I started a policy organization, Golden Together, and I've been traveling the state for the last 3 years or so, listening and learning about the problems and developing policy solutions. Gloria was on the board of Golden Together, and Michael and I actually launched our policy paper on crime in Huntington Beach precisely because of the points that Michael makes. And the title of the report was of punishment, certainty of rehabilitation. You got to have that clarity that if you do something wrong, you're going to be held accountable. That's what we've got to restore in our system. On the question of local control, I think there's a deep answer and a more practical answer. The deep answer is that actually all my career, pretty much going right back decades now, and you can trace this in the work that I've done, in the businesses that I've started, in the books that I've written. One of the themes, probably the central theme of everything I've worked on and argued for, is the decentralization of power. I hate centralized, bureaucratic, autocratic rule. Maybe that goes back to the fact that my parents are Hungarian and they fled communism in Hungary, and maybe it goes back to the fact probably that I came of age politically in the UK just on the back end of a disastrous decade of socialist rule, and Margaret Thatcher restored the spirit of enterprise in England by decentralizing power and all that. Anyway, it's a really deep thing for me. And so my instinct will be to reduce the state government's control over things. Just this morning, I was on a meeting with the rural counties, and they just were completely bossed around by people who have no idea what their lives are like and what their needs are. So generally speaking, I want to decentralize and reduce the power of the state government. However, you can't stand by as governor of the greatest state and the greatest nation on earth and watch as the greatest cities in the world, like Los Angeles, for example, or San Francisco, descend into chaos and squalor. There's a responsibility there.
It may be the bully pulpit again. It may be that you're
I
forced
think
to
that
go
there's
into
a
the
role.
city.
There's a concept which a little bit of jargon, but I think it does mean something, which is earned autonomy. Which is, if you show that you can run things. I sometimes apply this to my own sons, I have to tell you, which is, sure, you can be free to make your own choices, but it's got to be earned in the sense that you've got to do your job, and it's the responsibility of the governor to act as a certain backstop there. So I think that I will be looking to have a constructive partnership with counties and cities, for sure. Just like Gloria, I've worked across the aisle, and I've worked many different settings all around the world, in business and in government and in politics. For example, I was senior advisor to a conservative prime minister, but it was a coalition government. I actually shared an office, little office right next to the cabinet room in 10 Downing Street, with my opposite number from another party, and we worked together to get things done. Same with the cities, even if they're run by Democrats. I will want to work together, but I'm not going to stand by as the lives of millions of Californians continue to be ruined if they won't act. And so it's that sense of, can we agree that this needs to be done by a certain time, results focused? And if it's not done, then, I make this point in relation to homelessness, which is to say, when people say, what are you going to do about homelessness? The first line of my answer is, it is illegal. Homeless encampments are illegal. They have always been illegal. And if local law enforcement or local politicians won't enforce the law, in the end, I will make sure, using state law enforcement resources, Michael and I have talked about this, we will enforce the law. You just can't tolerate that kind of situation going on as it has for too long in California. So I think that my instinct will be to try and give more power to local leaders, but not at the expense of allowing this stagnation and squalor and decline and chaos to continue.
I think that's a great answer, Steve. And by the way, it's a bit nuanced, but I think it really demonstrates your fidelity to the idea that we do have local control and we need to be respectful of that. And how can we decry the left for opposing local control and then we turn around and do the opposite? Herb, there's got to be a role for the controller's office here in exposing public safety waste and abuse. Have you thought about how your office, when you get elected, can play a role here?
Well, one of the things that the state controller does is he or she sits on 70 boards and commissions of the state, chairs the franchise tax board. But when you get to public safety, the controller is a member of the CalPERS board, as well as the CalSTRS board. And the CalPERS board, many fall under that if they're not in a bigger city or a bigger county. In our $250 billion number, I specifically excluded analysis of pension, say spiking, and other what I call shenanigans that go on in the pension world, rotating people into positions in the last year of their career, the last 2 years of their career that they may or may not be qualified for, massive amounts of overtime, which has been partially pulled back. But, for example, we've got some places have what they call 4 men on a truck because the union mandated 4 firefighters on a truck as opposed to 3. There's lots of different ways. But in the end, the controller's job is just to make sure there's no theft of the resources. How the resources are spent, where they're allocated is the job of the legislature. My job is to make sure if they want to do something really dumb,
they get to do legal plunder and you get to fight illegal plunder. It's 2 different jobs.
Think of the controller as the research arm for the attorney general, right? So I'm going to find the bad behavior, and there's nothing I can do about it if Rob Bonta is in office. Because if you think about the 3 financial crimes that have been prosecuted so far, all 3 were not sourced by the state controller. All 3 were sourced by U.S. Attorney Bill Asaley's office. They were not prosecuted by Rob Bonta's office. So when we are in office as a team, I will use my financial brain and I will take mounds of data and I will walk over to Michael's office down the hall and I will hand it to him on a silver platter so that he can go out and put handcuffs on people that are taking our money.
I think that's great. Gloria, did you want to weigh in on the crime issue before we move on to education? I want to leave you out.
Absolutely. It's across the board. Just recently, there was an investigation. Congressman Kevin Kiley, in fact, highlighted it, looking at the financial aid applicants for students going into the community colleges and basically finding that perhaps up to a third of these applications for financial aid are fraudulent. So there's crime in every avenue. Don't get me started on K through 12, but that gives you an immediate response that's been in the news recently about fraud, wasted money, and wasted opportunities for the students who need it the most. Basically, first-generation college students entering into our community college system. It has to stop. And it will with this team.
Great. So well said. So Gloria, as we move on and we start to now talk about education as a topic and universities, K through 12, this is an area that has been a passion of yours. This is an area of which you were focused on it as a state legislator. You've been focused on it since you left the state legislature. So I'm sure you have put a lot of thought into how, as a lieutenant governor, you can engage on this issue where, frankly, when you want to talk about theft, currently the state of California is stealing the bright futures of millions of children through all of the abuses that are taking place in our education system. So talk to us, Gloria, about what you would do as lieutenant governor to focus on this issue.
Well, as lieutenant governor, I would be a regent, a trustee, and a governor of all three of those systems. And by the way, I'm not only a product of those three systems of higher education, I was actually a professor in each one of those systems as well. So I've dealt with these issues on a firsthand basis. Michael and I have had very good conversations about Title IX, for example. And Title IX is something that definitely I would advocate for in terms of protecting our girls. As a woman, I grew up in a generation with Helen Reddy that said, you know what, I am woman, hear me roar. And today they can't even define what a woman is. So we want to be fair. We want to make sure with compassion, as Herb always talks about, but making sure that girls, female athletes have fairness in playing. By the same token, after October 7th, I only live a few miles away from UCLA. Steve and I had a conversation. We were both horrified at the physical restraining and threatening of Jewish American students from even crisscrossing the UCLA campus. And Steve and I went to UCLA to demand the chancellor, the region, where was the lieutenant governor as a representative for higher
You,
ed?
you
They were nowhere
talking
to.
about UCLA. UCLA is a very sore subject for me because I grew up in the shadow of UCLA and I'm a Bruin fan. And between that incident, between a medical school where they apparently want to admit people under DEI standards, and then this whole director of DEI who, applauded and lauded the assassination of Charlie Kirk and called for,
Right.
Clarence Thomas, to be in, wouldn't cry if he died. It's pretty bad. Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You brought up UCLA, and so you keep going. I'm
Well,
gonna give you
that's
an
just the
opportunity.
UC system, but as well too, we could take a look, continuing onward, UC San Diego, where they found recently that a third of their incoming class basically were not proficient at basic levels of doing college preparedness. I saw this when I was teaching in the CSU system, and I always advocated to say we're doing no favors if you just socially promote, move people along. The piper will have to be paid at some point, and unfortunately, it's the students. Did you know that today in the Cal State system, we once thought that it was supposed to take 4 years to get a bachelor's degree? It's now up to 7 years and counting. So, working with this team, we're going to take a look at where we can cut. What do we invest in? How do we promote it? And how do we give voice to those parents and families wanting to preserve education in California as essentially, that's the promissory note to the American dream. So there's
Yeah.
so much that the lieutenant governor can do in all of these areas, and we intend to be very strong. And then extending it to K through 12 as well, which is the pipeline to higher ed. It feeds higher ed. We never make the links. We never talk about it. It's as though East and West, never the twain shall meet. With this
I mean,
team,
it's
we'll meet.
our friends at the California Teachers Association, our frenemies, right? They have been responsible for legislation to get rid of objective testing so that you actually understand that someone has mastered proficiencies before they can apply to college. I wrote a lot, and you all talked about that scandal out of UC San Diego where they did the study and found out that a huge percentage of incoming freshmen weren't prepared. Like they couldn't test them on the way in, but after you're admitted, you get a proficiency exam, right? Because they need to know what classes to put you in. And it goes to your issue of degrees taking 7 years because the CTA is not interested in the idea that the high school teachers have to be held accountable for outcomes. So, hey, graduate them out on time. We're not telling the parents their kids aren't smart. Let them spend 7 years in college rather than having to repeat 12th grade, right? So, Michael, Gloria talked a bit about Title IX, which was kind of my natural bridge to you to talk about how the Attorney General's office can deal with Title IX. But actually, this is an area where I feel like maybe it would be appropriate, instead of you talking about what you're going to do if you're the Attorney General, to maybe talk about what you have done during the time you spent in the Department of Justice on the Title IX issue. I think it's a great, as they say, the best predictor of future performance is past performance. So talk to us about what you did in Washington.
Yeah, well, so there's a variety of things I did during my time at the Department of Justice. Title IX enforcement was one of them. Anti-Semitism in the California UC system was another. And I spent a lot of time enforcing federal elections laws. I was actually the one that sued the state of California and also Orange County, California, among many other states for violating federal elections laws. Title IX was a real concern, and it was fertile ground for enforcement because throughout education systems throughout the nation, there was a misinterpretation of Title IX on the one hand, but also an affirmative agenda to ensure that basically boys were infiltrating girls' sports and activities and young men were infiltrating women's sports and activities. And what I plan to do here in California on day one, and when I say on day one, I mean this, quite literally between Election Day, which is in November, and the first day I'm sworn in, which is in January. So the 2 months there, I am actually going to be preparing formal Attorney General opinions on legal compliance, including with all federal laws, specifically with regard to Title IX. And then once we issue that Attorney General opinion with what Title IX is and what compliance means, we're also going to be sending letters to every single school throughout the state of California, every school board, and we are going to be notifying them of what Title IX means and what title compliance looks like.
Couldn't you just like take a copy of Title IX and like staple it to a biology book and mail it out to everybody? Is
Well,
that too obvious?
Well, that was sufficient for decades until the Biden administration came in, and the administration apparently took a magic marker and tried to rewrite what Title IX meant, basically saying that it means that
Right.
young boys can infiltrate girls' sports and things like that, which was completely wrong. But obviously states went even further than that, and they're encouraging boys to go into girls' sports. When we live in a day and time when young girls have to change in the car, they have to change for their sports in the car because they're afraid to go into the locker room because the systems currently allow or encourage co-ed locker rooms. And we're talking young girls. I mean, that's just sick and twisted. And so we need to do more to protect our young girls and our minors. And like I said, Title IX on day one is a high priority, and we are going to take the action that I spoke about, including working with the governor, Steve Hilton, and Lieutenant Governor Gloria to address the laws that are on the books that basically violate Title IX. And so there's some work that can be done there, and Steve obviously can speak to that. But what I want to emphasize to you, John, is this isn't just rhetoric, or these aren't just campaign talking points. There are specifics that we can do on day one, and I have a long list of things that I will do on day one. And I absolutely guarantee this Title IX issue will be addressed, and every single school and every single sports program is going to be hearing from me on day one when I'm the Attorney General. I guarantee it.
That's very strong and very welcome news indeed. We're going to talk a little bit about government accountability and power. Speaking of power, we're going to come back to you, Herb, because you're going to have all the financial power as the controller, or at least the books. So Sacramento uses delays, fund shifts, and accounting maneuvers to balance budgets. So what can you do as the controller as part of that annual budget process to make sure that everyone's using the same terminology, that everyone, that they're not playing smoke and mirrors? My favorite is, it seems like every year the first thing they do before anything is, hey, when's the last paycheck due of the year? And why don't we just pay everybody on the first day of July instead of on the last day of June? And it saves X amount of money in the budget by literally constantly shoving it forward to the next budget. It's bonkers. But Herb, how would you engage in this budget process and back up Governor Hilton as he is having to deal with a legislature that has a spending addiction?
Yeah, well, first, I will say that Governor Hilton has a tremendously sharp financial mind on his own, so I'm not particularly worried about if I was dealing with, say, a Governor Newsom, where I might have to tell him the difference between a debit and a credit. But look, we have reserve funds. Everybody here has reserve funds in their home. We have them in our state. And the purpose of a reserve fund is when you enter a recession and your revenue falls short, so that you don't have to cut the services to your citizenry, you can tap the reserve funds. But in California, with supermajority one-party control, we like to redefine words in the English language. So we have redefined balanced budget that says if at the budgeting process you actually budget to fully use the reserve fund during the year, you can call that budget balanced. Well, in no finance text, in no accounting text, in no proper rules of accounting is that ever remotely possible. But we went so far in California that we got a judge to agree that we can redefine words in the English language, and we now call the budget balanced if it raises reserves in the budgeting process, which is what we did last year. Then we take it a step further and basically underestimated the tax revenue in a time of a booming economy. We have a very strong economy. California is not as strong as the rest of the nation, to be sure, but we are still the fourth largest economy in the world. The tax revenue from income, the tax revenue from capital gains, it's massive. And we are still between 18 and 25 billion short this year. So the controller's role specifically in the budgeting process is to try to provide advice, common sense, redefine what a reserve fund is meant to be. But the controller really has to sit there and then implement the budget that's given to them by the legislature and signed by the governor.
Well, Herb, when I look at the situation, it always seems like the only adult in the room during the budgeting process, when you have one party rule, has been the legislative analyst who continually comes out. And I don't agree with, it's kind of one of those situations where everything's relative. And so I don't agree with every position of the state auditor. That's another good one, but the legislative analyst. But there's so much common sense there that, it just really shows you how out of whack are. And I do think, Herb, that you have an opportunity to play that role as well, which is to say, hey, look, here's my report on the finances of the state, and here are the and I think you can lean into it, and I think you would lean into it by common sense. I can imagine it now, right? Steve introduces a budget proposal, and the first thing you get to do is come out and kind of grade it. And you get to grade the proposal based on its efficacy and all of that. But Steve, I have to come to you on this. This is more on the same topic, right? This really has to do with introducing a budget and fiscal sanity. I'm sure you've put a lot of thought into this. So why don't you talk to us about what a Governor Hilton would do?
Yeah, also just very quickly, just to sort of underline what Michael was saying on biological boys and girls sports, that's also, you're going to have this a full-on assault because the bill that enacted this insanity, B 1266, passed in 2013. But part of our team here is Dan Kolke, a very, very experienced lawyer who is on Governor Wilson's team and on Governor Schwarzenegger. We've been working on this, and that violates California law. The California Constitution. Never mind anything else. It's just that we've had for years no governor or attorney general that actually wants to really press on these things. Together we will. In terms of the budget, there's a number of ways I just want to get into it. First of all, there's a sort of starting point, which is we have to cut taxes in California. We have the highest taxes in the country for the worst results, literally the worst results in nearly every case. We're the worst performing state on almost anything that matters. And so we have to cut spending in order to be able to cut taxes without going into deficits. That's the starting point. Now, at the start of my campaign, I laid out a very simple tax plan. We can come back and discuss it and revise it in the light of, evolving budgets. But the point was simple. We got to cut taxes for working people because they're the ones being hurt the most by these insane Democrat policies. And we have to have cut taxes to encourage growth because it's only through growth that we're actually going to generate the revenue to enable us to live the lives that we want.
How could we possibly finish the high-speed rail if you cut taxes, Steve?
Okay, so look, here's where we got to, which is first $100,000 tax-free. That was my proposal. Above $100,000, a flat tax of 7.5%. Pro-worker, pro-growth. I actually costed that out. When we first moved here from England, I taught at Stanford University, was a fellow at the Hoover Institution, went back to my colleagues at Hoover. We did we put that plan together, costed. Even without accounting for the dynamic effects of the impact on growth, that plan that I put together reduces state revenue by about 18.5%, roughly 60 billion in spending. Herb's just laid out earlier that there's way more than that in the budget that's fraud and abuse and so on. So the initial budget is going to come in with a really significant spending cut. And by the way, this is not some outlandish shrink the state Republican, Project 2025. This is just taking the budget back to what it was a few years ago. And it's a point that Herb and I make the whole time. They've nearly doubled the budget in the last 5 years. So the idea that we can't cut spending is and without hurting services is completely ridiculous. The money's not being spent where it should be. But there's a broader point point I want to get to, which is something that we announced, all four of us announced just over nearly 2 weeks ago now, which is something that will underlie a lot of this work. DOGE, the California Department of Government Efficiency, which is already up and running and working. We will have our first story of fraud that we have identified with our volunteer team just in the last 10 days or so. That's going to be coming out this week. And that is going to be a crucial part of all this. The California Department of Government Efficiency will be housed within Herb's department, and it will have two roles, helping Herb with the fraud spotting and waste and abuse. But there's a second really important function, which will be crucial to reducing spending and the bloat in the government. And that is the government reform part of this, which doesn't get spoken about enough. And that is cutting back and shutting down the agencies and all this bureaucracy that often duplicates what's going on regionally and with the counties and the cities, and is just adding to the cost and burden of life in California without any benefit. Now, there's a guy called Paul Miner who actually worked in the Schwarzenegger administration. He led something called the California Performance Review, which had a whole focus on this kind of work, but it was never implemented. And so Paul has now joined CalDOGE. He's working to update that, and with a mandate from me to absolutely aggressively attack all these parts of the government that are just causing spending to rise. And so this is a really serious effort we're putting together, and the work is already happening. This is not going to be something we get to after we're elected in the couple of months before we take office. We're going to arrive at that point with a plan ready to go.
That's great, Steve. Herb, did you? I'll let you close out this section on government accountability, since you're the government accountability guy. Well, one of them on the financial side.
That's right. So I wanted to really just add on to that. When Steve takes office as governor, we all take our offices next January. We're exactly in the middle of our fiscal year. So he's going to have his first proposal that's going to go through the legislature, and then ultimately it'll be the budget that starts on July 1st of 2027. So I've got 6 months, right? I've got 6 months to show and to prove to the Californian people that not only can we find the waste, fraud, and abuse, but we can actually increase the quality of the services we provide. We've got 40% spent on education as an example. We literally can have the best public universities, the best K through 12, pre-K, the best community colleges, and we can do it for far less money if we just care enough to root it out. And that, you're going to be shocked when you see Steve's budget with better services at lower cost, literally innovation in government.
Well, you're going to make me talk about the California Teachers Association and the Service Employees International Union and the California Federation of Labor. All these, there are so many fat and happy interest groups that are coming in between all of the things that government can do well and efficient, and instead it's all being sucked into this kleptocracy where everybody's money is going into the bottomless pit of improving the standard of living of government workers, and it's pretty bad. So we're going to do something here that's for a little bit different. We're going to kind of do a kind of a lightning round, but multiple rounds. So that means this is not an opportunity for 2 or 3 minute responses, or we're going to do one round. This will be a chance for you to just kind of weigh in, and all four of you will get a chance to address every single one of these. I'm going to kind of mix it around, but it just, again, we're at that point this far into the podcast where I want people to be like, this is the best part, and wake up and really, really focus. So the first question that I would ask to each one of you is if you could repeal any one law in the state of California, just one. I mean, there's many, right? But if you would pick one, and I know Steve's got one off the top of his head, so I'm going to let him go first. That way the rest of you guys can really think about it. But Steve, one law that you would repeal.
I'm going to start with the global warming.
You could hit the delete button.
No, I'm ready to go with this one. I think I'm going to start with the Global Warming Solutions Act, I believe 2006, because if you look at the nightmare of doing anything in California, the cost, the bureaucracy, gas prices, electric, all this stuff, a huge part of it is the climate crusade that the Democrats have been pushing for years, and it goes right back to that bill that was passed 20 years ago now, delete, and life becomes much easier and cheaper for every family and business in California.
That's great. It's taken us almost through the entire podcast for me to finally bring up. I feel like I should have maybe I'll put an evil sound on this when I bring up the name of Gavin Newsom. But I mean, when he went off to Brazil pretending to be president and spoke to that UN climate conference and had the nerve to talk about how climate policies make everything more affordable, I thought I was going to throw up in my mouth because it's literally the opposite. Gloria, what's one law that if you could blow it up tomorrow, it was gone? You didn't need to get it through the legislature, just like by fiat. What would it be?
I would go back to education. Today in California, in the K through 12 system, it takes essentially 15 months, 2 years on the books for a teacher in K through 12 to essentially have a job for life without any merit pay, without any pay for performance, you just have to show up and breathe and you've got a job for life. We want to have professionals in the system. This is something that should be done. Kids in California in the Vergara lawsuit some years ago actually took it on. We won through the courts at the Supreme Court, aided by the then Attorney General and the teachers union. They basically took away that victory that the kids had at a lower court level and basically kept in place what we have today. And so much of that is the stem of our problems today. I would get rid of that right now. Let's start over. Reward meritocracy. Treat teachers as the professionals that they want to be, not just show up, breathe, and you can't get rid of the bad ones.
Great answer. Michael, you've had a time here.
Yeah, I have plenty of time, and I thought of a lot of laws. As you can probably
You got to
imagine,
pick one for this quick round.
I know. I'm just going to tell you this right now. There are so many federal laws that we're not compliant with, whether it is Title IX-like laws or sanctuary state with federal immigration. There's been an attack on local control. I would repeal all those, the RENA laws, but I will pick one specifically, and that is the punitive and arbitrary and capricious law of AB 1147, which is the state's ban on local jurisdictions implementing their own voter ID laws. So the state passed a law in response to Huntington Beach's law. So Huntington Beach passed a voter ID law. Then the state said, no, we're going to pass a ban so that you can't have your own voter ID laws. AB 1147, state's ban on local voter ID laws requirements, is unconstitutional and it has to be repealed. And there should be voter ID in every jurisdiction.
That's a great answer.
Would repeal.
All right. Herb, what do you think? If you could nuke a bill.
Gosh, there's
Nuke
so
'em all.
many, but if I had to pick one, it would be CEQA. I think CEQA is
That's the
least
California
Environmental Quality
Environmental
Act. Yeah,
Quality
probably the least environmentally conscious or friendly law that we have. Again, we're Republicans, we're compassionate, we care about the environment, but this has done nothing but enrich litigators and drive up and embed that cost into the price of housing. One of the main reasons people can't afford to live here, and my young daughter and her new husband had to move to another state to afford to live, was because of the cost of housing. So anything related to costs is where I want to start, but CEQA would be top. And I'm going to take a point of privilege and I'm going to protect one law at all cost. I'm going to put it in an iron cast, and that is Prop 13.
Here. Okay. By the way, I get to weigh in. I'm not a candidate. I'm not running for anything. But if I could repeal one law, it would have been the law that was signed that allowed the state to have public employee unions. I think the elimination of the public employee unions is the gateway to actually making all the changes that we want to talk about. All right. So the next thing I want to ask is, what's one thing that state government, and this is another one where Michael's going to go, there's too many. What's one thing that state government is doing right now that you would simply stop them from doing? Like, you're done. We can't do this anymore. And we'll start.
Back in the day, I would take a look at how budgets were built. And geologists would love this because essentially they're like layers of sediment. So budgets are simply, they're just passed forward and then you keep building on them. I would basically say, stop, enough. Let's try zero-based budgeting, where you basically have to put in the dollar, justify it, and with that also do evaluations on how that dollar is spent and what's the bang for the buck, what's the outcome. Rather than just automatically building, you just get a pile of bleep at the end of the day, and that's what California is looking at after 16 years of one-party rule, just building that geological budget formation.
All right. Michael, what would be the one thing that the state has currently got as a program or they're spending on that you would just say goodbye.
Yeah, so Attorney General Rob Bonta, who, by the way, is mired in his own controversy and spending $500,000 on criminal defense attorneys, launched a series of lawsuits against hospitals and other medical facilities because those hospitals and medical facilities, this is recently, they took a position they took a position to refuse to perform transgender surgeries on minor children. And so our Attorney General sued them to force those hospitals to perform mutilation on our children. And so I would absolutely talk about another day one item. My day one, by the way, is going to be a very long day, John. I can guarantee you, because one of the
We'll
things
have
I'm
to
going to
stop the clock at midnight on 11:59 until you're done.
one of the things I'm going to do on day one is absolutely drop all of these lawsuits. Medical facilities and hospitals are going to get back to protecting patients and protecting children and not mutilating them. And I can guarantee you this, let me put this on the record. If there's any doctor or medical professional or parent who consents to the mutilation of their child, they will be prosecuted under our current criminal laws for doing so. I guarantee it.
Very strong. Herb, what do you say? What would you blow up? What one thing?
Well, we're going to blow up on one day the secrecy around spending, right? The fact that NGOs get block grants and people use them to double escrow and put $16 million in their pocket or pay $2 million to American Express. On day one, if a sitting senator or assembly member or citizen or governor wants to know what we spent where, they will have access to that information. You see it now. I saw Senator Jones ask for information about the high-speed rail. He had to have a press conference. Shouldn't a senator just be allowed to look at the books?
Yeah,
It's
you would think.
insane that only one person has that access, the controller. We're going to give that access to everybody.
All right, Steve, you get the final word on this.
Well,
But I know it's hard to pick one. If I know you, you'll have like a bronze, silver, and gold category. But go ahead.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do want to say all of it. I mean, the bloat is just off the charts, and I do want to make a point about how we're going to stop adding to it, right? Because they keep passing this legislation, and that's the one thing. I mean, we can get into what the governor can do when you got the legislature. We've talked about appointments and the legislation and things I don't want to work with them on. But also, I'm just going to stop signing these bills that make it worse. Last session they passed 1,018 bills. I make a joke saying, we did an event at the Capitol where we printed them all out. I know I'm not very tall. This was twice my height. I mean, you're just going to stop all that, right? Because each one of these bills basically adds to the kind of layers of bureaucracy and nonsense. I think the number one program we got to stop actually is, I mean, it's very broad, is this pursuit of net zero by 2045. So much flows from that, including a very specific one I'm going to end with, because part of that is what they used to call cap and trade. Now it's called cap and invest. Classic Orwellian nonsense. And part of that is high-speed rail funding. So that's going to go as well.
That's going to go right away. With that, we're going to finish up here. I'm going to go to each of you in a minute so that you can tell everybody how to reach your campaigns. But I wanted to thank you all for participating. This is a very exciting time and a great group of folks. And if you're watching on this or listening to it on your favorite podcasting app, the single greatest thing that you can do if you're excited about any or all of these candidates is share this, spread it around, and let people understand that taking on what's going on in Sacramento is not a one-person job. It takes a team. And I don't know if the golden ticket eventually is going to add more members or not, but these are four very important offices that all need to be occupied by adults in the room who understand the fidelity of the taxpayer. And so I appreciate it all. So I'm just going to very quickly, Michael, what's your website? What can people do to help you?
Gates4ag.com. That's Gates, the number 4ag.com.
All right, Gloria?
GloriaRomero.com, GloriaRomero.com.
All right, Herb?
HerbMorgan.com and at Herb, the number 4 controller on all the social medias.
All right. And last but not least, Mr. Hilton?
So Steve Hilton for governor.com, now with FOR, not the number 4, Steve Hilton for governor.com. John, can I just say one thing about the importance of this team and this ticket? Do you mind?
Absolutely.
I want to say, first of all, that it's real, that we're friends. We work together. We are talking all the time, not just for show. We are actually talking about real policy matters and the plans we're putting in place. I met Gloria when she was working with Rick Grinnell many years ago on a school choice initiative. We've been working together for years. I met Michael, when right at the beginning of this process, I connected with Tony Strickland, actually on housing and on Huntington Beach and Michael's fight against the housing mandates imposed by Gavin Newsom. And we've been talking for years. I launched my campaign in Huntington Beach precisely because it represents the kind of fight that Michael was so instrumental in leading. We were introduced more than a year ago now by our friend Carl DeMaio, and we've been working so closely on all of this fraud, and Cal Doge and many more to come. So this is a real team. And exactly as you said, John, it's necessary. I've worked in business most of my career and at the heart of our government. Nothing happens through just one person. You have to work together. It's actually extraordinary to me that this hasn't happened before. But just as you said at the top of the show, it hasn't ever been done before. This is new. This is different. You've never seen it from a candidate for governor from either party putting together a team like this. And there will be more because it will take more. Not just the other statewide elected offices, but all the people, as I mentioned earlier, leading the agencies. It's going to be an incredible team because we have to do something different to show people that after 16 years of one-party rule, we don't have to put up with this. We can go in a different direction. And you've got a team of serious, credible, qualified people with a plan for change that's ready to go. That's what this is all about. And each week that goes by and we work together more closely, I feel more and more energy and excitement from it.
Well, Steve's going to get the last word because we have bumped up on time, but I just wanted to make sure everybody watching, the name of this website is So Does It Matter, because all of this stuff matters a lot. This team of people is not going to be in office unless you all do something about it. So thanks, everybody, and thanks to all four of you for spending time with us.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having us.